And when he's saying large, we're talking onions that are they're bigger than a softball.
If you know you're doing the right thing, then the next test is being patient. Okay, I'm Jason Kafka, Checkerberry Farm. My wife Barbara and I have been living in the same place since 1981. We were certified organic in 1990 and kind of started growing homestead, and things got out of hand and got into the farming thing. So our focus here is onions, which at some point we were selling to food vendors at the Common Ground Fair, and we had one visit us at the farm, which we're in the Maine Central Highlands, little town of Parkman. But this vendor came along and he saw some of these onions we were growing and asked if we could do that for their stand, which we did, and they were Elsa Craig large Spanish type onions, which we received some notoriety because sometimes they would become ridiculously large, which 2.5 pound, 3 pound onions are a little outrageous, but they were doing onion rings and blooming onions, and so whether deserved or not, we got some reputation for growing onions. So then we're growing onions for other people at farms, Wood Prairie Farm being one that bought onions from us for a good number of years, and we would contract grow, and it was always nice for me that since we're clicking the switch and spending money heating a greenhouse, that we could fill the benches up with onions contracted for other people, and then as the onions would go off to their respected farms, we could focus on filling the benches up with stuff for our own production. So here we have onions for Wood Prairie Farm, destined for folks' gardens. I'll tell one little story. We had neighbors who felt that with sets they were way ahead of us, but come the end of the year when it was time to harvest, these onions started from seed were always so much better. And truth be known, we haven't used sets for
ever since we started growing from seed.
Yeah, so since sometime in the early 80s. And so you have a much better, vigorous plant. And you don't have some of the disease issues you may get with a set. A set is like a miniature onion that has gone into dormancy, but it doesn't know that it's gone into a dormant state, but it hasn't, it doesn't think it's gone through the first year yet. So when it gets planted, it doesn't bolt and go to produce seed right away. Anyway, so we have these ambers, which are a yellow storage type, and the Rosa de Milano, which is this is a strain of Rosa that a lot of focus has been put on it, and it stores remarkably well. I remember decades ago, I think you guys had it, and they didn't hold very well, but these seed breeders can be pretty tenacious, and so through the selective process of how they going through their stock in the winter and rejecting ones that may be showing signs of breaking dormancy, they reject those and keep the ones that hold that stay asleep longer. So these are two varieties that I'm rather pleased with.
Jason and I have known each other for probably 25, 30 years. We both served on the Maine Organic Farmer and Gardeners Association certification committee for about 20 years together. So we got to know each other, I'd say, through that, because we're focused on growing and shipping seed potatoes in the spring. It's really our busiest time of year when we're shipping out seed potatoes. So we were growing commercial organic vegetables at the time, and Jason had developed the reputation of being one of the best onion growers in Maine. So we worked out a deal that he would start onion plants ahead for us that we would then plant on the farm. And it was a time of year where we had zero capacity to grow something like onions. Just didn't have the facility, didn't have the time, and it worked out beautifully. And so for 25 years we've been buying onion plants from Jason and his wife Barbara, and we plant them here on our farm. Now we're turning around and, if this is a need for us, we thought this would be a good opportunity to supply a need for our customers. So this year is the first year that we're bringing in onions from Jason and Barbara, and we're going to ship them out in units of about 48 or 50 in a bundle. So the onions, they start out as plants. You plant them about 6 inches apart, and then they will grow to full-sized onions. And we've got 2 different varieties, Amber, which is a golden onion, and Rosa di Milano, which is an heirloom from Italy. As the name implies, it's red-skinned, and they're both good-keeping varieties. You can plant them this time of year, April, early May. They'll grow full size. They'll keep all winter.
Most onions react to the lessening days, and that's when they get the idea that it's time to store energy for the dormant phase. So we want them to have all the energy and nutrients, sunlight to grow, to reach their capacity. So they think they're going to go in their dormant phase, and then at the back end of that phase, they can break dormancy, wake up, and then produce seed. We don't tell them that we're going to eat them during that time frame, but if they grow right, conditions are good, they store remarkably well. Generally, these would be long day varieties, which where we are on the planet, halfway between equator and the North Pole, we grow these long day varieties. So when the day length starts shortening, and it depends on different varieties, but they'll start bulbing, and that's basically just storing energy for that the duration of dormancy.
Heavy feeding.
Yeah. So, onions are pretty wimpy in a way, and this is where you can get into the background of why does an onion do these things. But there isn't a lot of solar surface for them to get their solar energy, and their root systems are pretty simple. So we as growers have to pay attention to keeping weeds back and providing the fertility, because they need all the help they can get there. And it's not for their purpose, because basically any of these alliums, they'll go to seed when they're ready, but we want them for their size, and we want to have a worthwhile onion to chop when we're in the kitchen. So that's the goal of ours. So they need to be, try to keep them clean, as clean as you can. And one factor I tell gardeners that, keep up with it till you get overwhelmed somewhere in midsummer. And the longer you can keep them clean, the better for them.
Weed free.
By clean you mean weed free.
Weed free, yeah. The germ farmer lingo there.
Yeah, onions don't compete well against weeds. You take a crop like potatoes or squash, and the foliage is such that it covers the ground and it denies weeds light, and it prevents the weeds from growing. Onions don't do that. So by doing a good job weeding early on, and then maybe applying a mulch that can prevent the weeds from germinating second half of the season, you can get a good crop. But as Jason said, the allium family are day length sensitive. So when you plant an onion, say these long day onions, which are good for the northern half of the United States and northward, you plant them in April or May, then you get top growth while the days are getting longer until the first day of summer. And then at that point, you start to get the bulb developed. So you got to plant them early enough and get healthy growth adequately so that you get enough of a top to be able to support the bulb growth for the second half, because it's the bulbs that we're after. So by planting it on time in April or May, getting it water, nutrition, keeping the weeds out, that grows a strong top, and it's the strong top that in turn grows the full-size bulb that is going to be good for eating and good for storing.
Yeah. That's what drives the engine of the onion. when half of the onions are flopped over,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
when half of them will flop over, the tops, they'll finish, and that bulb is going into its dormant phase. So basically, it's encapsulating the plant in the middle of that onion, and so the top falls over. But you don't need to wait for all of them to fall over. If different people have different levels, but if half of the onions have flopped, the tops have flopped over, then you can go over with a rake or something, or some people would roll a barrel over their onions to finish the tops to flop over, and then you leave them there for a while, and that I think of it like a cell, but it closes up and is ready to get pulled, and then you dry them down on out on a sunny deck or on a bench in a greenhouse.
And this is for harvest, you're saying?
Yeah, for harvest.
For harvesting, okay.
I actually, we grow on the plastic, and so the silver plastic, which helps eliminate weeding and reflects a lot of light, which just throws the thrips off. They don't recognize the onion, but it also bathes the onions in a lot more light. So not only are they getting the sunlight from the top, but the reflected sunlight. And disadvantage is that you don't want to send the crew to work in the onion field on a sunny day because it's too hot and too blinding. But when we pull the onions, we pull them by hand and we windrow them right on the plastic. And I don't care if it rains. If it rains, it's kind of nice because then it just makes the dealing with the onions after harvest, they're not as dusty, or there's not the fines that you would get. So the roots get washed off, and generally, you get a rain, and then it's high pressure again, so things dry off. And then we'll pull them, and we have a gadget that takes the tops, a mechanical gadget that takes the tops off, and get them into we have a dry room in the barn that has a big dehumidifier in it, which I'll put the bins of. I've gone through various stages of air getting sucked up through a bin. How do you keep the moisture down? Because moisture can be a great vector for bringing diseases in. So we have this one storage room where we have this big dehumidifier, and we just keep the humidity down below 60%, and things store very well in there.
What temperature do they like to store at?
Cold. Actually, ideally dark, a few degrees above freezing, low humidity. That's like the ideal. Humidity is, like I said, can vector in diseases, and then you get issues, and you have to paw through everything to get the problem ones out. But
So how do you, on a commercial organic production scale, how do you keep weeds out of a crop like onions?
well, we're using the plastic as one, plastic mulch, and we plant 6 inches apart. And we have a water wheel planter that punches the hole. The onion gets set in that hole, and then we'll have, because it's the plastic, we can't go through with our mechanical weeding, so we just have to walk through the beds. And when you see something poking up that shouldn't be there, you pluck it out. But there's handwork involved with it.
How about the Regio weeder? Do you use that anymore?
Which one is that?
Spinner?
Oh, the Reggie or Echo.
Reggie. Reggie.
No, that it didn't fit my scheme anymore. So actually, I sold it to Piecemeal Farm.
Oh, really?
Which they use it. I asked Mark, and he uses it periodically. But yeah, that was a very nice. I have now the ones that go on bare soil. We have the array. We have our little offset cultivating tractor with regular knives and finger weeders, and depending on the different factors of what's out there, how do you address whatever the problem is? You decide what tools to get clicked onto the machine to cultivate. The fingers are nice. They take a little bit more of faith in it that you're not going to be knocking your plants out of the ground and all. But like all these tools we have, once you get familiar with them, you know which tool to grab to use. the golfing analogy is when I like, sometimes sometimes you need the putter and sometimes you need the driver, and it just takes a certain amount of experience to know, well, this is what I need for this certain circumstance.
And if you do, the way we looked at it with weeding on an organic farm is if you do a good job early in the season, then you can go fishing in the second half of the season.
Yep.
If you do a lousy job early in the season, there's no fishing, and there's going to be a smaller crop because the weeds are going to win.
And you get frustrated. And a bad crop costs more to make than a good crop. So, we don't like playing catch up. That's
Well, there's no winning. There's no catching up.
yeah.
It's just delayed disaster.
And that story when they got weedy and you had the people.
Oh well, we did have some of those Alsa Craig onions one year, and we had a.
And when he's saying large, we're talking onions that are they're bigger than a softball.
We had one neighbor came, and she was a good back to the land mom, couple small children, and we had saved some of the big ones aside. She came the second day of harvest, and when she saw these onions on the lawn, she went, "My God, those are infant heads," which 2.5, 3 pound onions. It's
and that's an heirloom variety.
it is an heirloom variety, and open pollinated. Just
That weedy time.
But we had this farm tour. It was our local soil and water district came along, and that was 2001. But we had this new weed come in over the previous couple of years, Galansoga, which is a remarkable plant. But we kept up with the weeds as best we could, but then the demands of everything, you can't get there. But our onion crop virtually disappeared in this bed of Galansoga. Fortunately, it's settled down now. It's not a nuisance anymore. But anyway, the crop was in this field, and if you were to look at it, you would question that statement because there wasn't a sign of any onions. And because of the Galansoga grows so fast. But I stepped in, I found my first onion, and I pulled it out, and the crowd, there was a great rush of air from everybody because once I found the first one, then I knew the row was going that way, and I could just keep pulling them out. But keeping up with it as long as you can. I mean, we all have other lives, other aspects in our lives to keep up with. But, keep up with the onions, and it'll be a benefit to you if you can keep up with it. On a garden scale, that's the thing with gardeners. I mean, we're all optimists in the spring, and then the reality comes along, which might be August, and then paying for the reality in September. But plant a reasonable amount that you can reasonably keep up with it. Partition some time, schedule time every week that this is going to, instead of going to the club or something to do the elliptical or something, go in the garden and work on your cardio out there and weed before you can really even see the weeds. Just keep it stirred up, and there's all sorts of handy dandy cure-all tools out there that are being marketed, but find some decent tools that work for you, and don't buy cheap tools. Buy good tools, and they make the work easier. There's lots of salesmen out there wanting to sell you their goods, but
we've got a collection of hose here that are pretty common on organic farms. Stirrup hose is kind of the standard. And that this you can go front and back ways. You can get in very close to the plant, and you're only going very shallow in the soil. So you're killing the weed, but you're not pulling up weed seed to the surface that in the presence of light and moisture, that's going to germinate. So some of these tools, again, these are lifetime tools. You do sometimes wear out the blades, but then you can buy a new head and put a blade on. But as Jason said, you want to get good tools that are made well, and they're going to really last virtually forever.
Yep. linseed oil on the handle, and
That would have been a good idea.
well,
It's on my to-do list.
Yeah. There's a lot of-
Been on there for quite a while.
we all have those lists. Some people, depending how you plant them, so if you make a little furrow, you can just lay them down, and the bulb, this is going to be the bulb, so ideally when it's getting big, the bulb is just sitting on the ground, or it might be a third in the soil and the 2/3 above. But some folks, they'll trim the top a little bit, and they'll trim the roots a little bit, because some folks will use the dibble method, which they poke a hole in the ground, and when you stick that onion in the ground, the roots get pushed up. So then they all have to grow back down again.
No.
So if you can take that little mop top and just trim it a little bit.
Just if you're going to be dibbling, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We always just, had like a furrow, and we were doing them by hand, like
Yeah.
a little furrow, and you kind of push the soil onto
Yeah.
them. And then it doesn't matter how the roots
Right.
are.
Right.
I'd think in most cases you're going to want to leave all the roots on
But
that you can.
yes.
In tree planting, they used to call those J roots. When you'd slam them in, and they told us we don't want any J roots, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
you do what they tell you to do.
But it is pretty remarkable when C.R. Lawn, the founder of Fedco Seeds, had a comment, and it was about the Elsa Craigs, but C.R. is a character that has no need for a pocket calculator, because the gears in his head, he could do any combination of numbers, catalog numbers, everything he would just do in his head, discounts, all that. But he said the Elsa Craigs were at 80,000 to 1 return. So one seed turning into one onion.
Oh, yeah, weight-wise, yeah. Yeah.
Which,
So these are probably only 40 or 50,000.
underachievers.
Right.
But they're pretty
Cool.
rugged.
Right.
I know, depending on how they get. I always like going directly, as the quicker the possible, going from the trays into the ground. But they're remarkably tenacious plants, and sometimes they'll look, and I see this in some catalogs, they'll look pretty beat up, but they bounce right back. This is. I guess part of the farming / gardening is that if you're doing the right thing, then the next test is being patient, and then seeing how, like a transplant will look droopy,
Yeah.
and give it the right amount of time, and it pops right back up.
Yeah.
And if you've got a choice, you're better off to plant something like an onion on a cloudy day rather than on a hot sunny day, because it's going to be a shock going from, say, inside a greenhouse, even if you've hardened them off, to putting them out. So cloudy day, just makes sense. It makes it easier. It's less stress on them, and you do want to water them in.
Yeah.